You never really know someone until you see them afraid. I learned that the night my friend Jamie disappeared. We'd been inseparable since childhood, the kind of friends who finished each other's sentences and shared secrets we'd never dare tell anyone else. We'd grown up in a town that felt like it was always holding its breath, a place where the past lingered in the corners and the shadows seemed to stretch a little too long. There were stories, of course, every small town has them. But none haunted us more than the old St. Augustine Hospital. It was a place that loomed over our childhood like a warning. The hospital had been abandoned for decades, its windows boarded up, its walls covered in graffiti and ivy. Some said it was haunted, others said it was cursed, but everyone agreed on one thing: you didn't go inside. Not if you valued your sanity. Not if you wanted to come back out. But Jamie was never one to listen to warnings. He was the kind of person who ran toward danger, who laughed in the face of fear. I was the opposite, cautious, careful, always thinking 2 steps ahead. Maybe that's why we worked so well together. He pushed me to take risks, and I kept him from going too far. Or at least, I thought I did. It started as a dare. We were sitting in my car, parked on the edge of the hospital grounds, the engine idling and the radio playing low. The night was thick with fog, the kind that muffles sound and makes the world feel smaller. Jamie turned to me, his eyes bright with excitement. "Let's go inside," he said, grinning. "Just for a minute. We'll take some pictures, prove we were there, and get out. Come on, man. Don't you want to know what's in there?" I hesitated, glancing at the looming silhouette of the hospital. The stories came back to me, of people who'd gone in and never come out, of strange lights and voices in the night. But Jamie was already out of the car, grabbing his flashlight and camera, waving for me to follow. I told myself it would be fine. That the stories were just that, stories. That we'd be in and out before anyone even knew we were there. I grabbed my own flashlight, locked the car, and followed Jamie across the cracked pavement, our footsteps echoing in the silence. The hospital was even more imposing up close. The front doors were chained shut, but Jamie found a broken window around the side, just big enough for us to squeeze through. The air inside was colder, heavy with the scent of mold and decay. Our flashlights cut through the darkness, illuminating peeling paint, rusted equipment, and graffiti that seemed to crawl across the walls. We moved slowly, our footsteps crunching on broken glass and debris. Every sound seemed amplified, the drip of water from a leaky pipe, the distant creak of metal, the soft scurrying of rats in the walls. Jamie was fearless, moving ahead, snapping pictures, laughing at the absurdity of it all. I stayed close behind, my heart pounding, every nerve on edge. We explored the first floor, finding old exam rooms, a collapsed waiting area, and a nurse's station covered in dust. Jamie joked about finding a ghost, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his laughter faded too quickly. There was something wrong about the place, something that made the air feel thick and the shadows seem to move on their own. We found a staircase leading down to the basement. Jamie insisted we check it out, convinced that was where the real secrets were. I argued, but he wouldn't listen. He was already halfway down the stairs, his flashlight bobbing in the darkness. I followed, telling myself I couldn't let him go alone. The basement was worse than the rest of the hospital. The air was colder, the darkness deeper. Our flashlights barely pierced the gloom, revealing rows of old hospital beds, rusted and broken, lined up like soldiers in the dark. The walls were covered in strange symbols, painted in what looked like dried blood. I felt a chill run down my spine. Jamie moved ahead, drawn to a door at the far end of the room. It was slightly ajar, a faint light flickering inside. He pushed it open, and I heard him gasp. "Dude, you have to see this," he called. I hesitated, every instinct screaming at me to turn back. But I couldn't leave him. I stepped into the room, my flashlight trembling in my hand. What I saw made my blood run cold. Inside the room, the air felt different, thicker, almost electric, as if the space itself was holding its breath. My flashlight beam wavered across the walls, catching on old medical charts, a toppled gurney, and a row of cabinets with their doors hanging open like broken jaws. But it was the center of the room that drew my eyes. There, under the harsh, flickering light of a single, ancient bulb, stood an operating table. The metal was stained and pitted with rust, but what made my stomach twist was the way the straps hung limply from the sides, as if someone had only just been released. Jamie was already at the table, his camera flashing as he snapped photo after photo. "This is insane," he whispered, his voice echoing off the tile. "Can you imagine what happened here? Look at this." He pointed to a set of deep scratches gouged into the metal, as if someone had tried to claw their way free. I didn't want to imagine. Every instinct told me to get out, to drag Jamie back up the stairs and never look back. But he was transfixed, moving around the table, examining every detail. I tried to keep my focus on him, but something about the room kept pulling my attention away. The shadows seemed to shift and pulse at the edges of my vision, and the air was filled with a low, almost inaudible hum, like distant machinery. Then I noticed the door on the far side of the room. It was smaller than the others, half hidden behind a stack of old supply crates. Unlike the rest of the hospital, it looked new, its paint unchipped, its handle gleaming in the flashlight's beam. Jamie saw it too. "Let's check it out," he said, already moving toward it. I grabbed his arm. "Maybe we should go. We've got enough pictures. This place is giving me the creeps." He shook me off, grinning. "Come on, man. Don't chicken out now. We're already here." He pushed the crates aside and tried the handle. The door swung open with a soft sigh, revealing a narrow hallway lined with white tiles. The hum grew louder, vibrating in my bones. Jamie stepped inside, and I followed, my heart hammering in my chest. The hallway seemed to stretch on forever, the light from our flashlights swallowed by the darkness ahead. The hum became a pulse, steady and rhythmic, like a heartbeat. The walls were covered in more symbols, some familiar, others alien, all painted in that same dark, dried substance. I tried not to look too closely. At the end of the hallway, we found another door, this one heavy and reinforced with metal bands. Jamie hesitated for the first time, glancing back at me. "You ready?" he asked, his bravado slipping. I nodded, though every part of me wanted to run. He pushed the door open, and we stepped into a room unlike any we'd seen before. It was circular, the walls lined with mirrors that reflected our flashlight beams in dizzying patterns. In the center of the room was a chair, old, padded, with leather straps on the arms and legs. The hum was deafening now, vibrating through the floor and up into my bones. Jamie moved toward the chair, his camera forgotten. "What is this place?" he whispered. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My eyes were drawn to the mirrors, each one reflecting not just us, but something else, shapes that moved in the corners, shadows that didn't belong. I felt a cold hand brush my shoulder and spun around, but there was nothing there. Jamie sat in the chair, laughing nervously. "Take a picture of me," he said, trying to sound brave. I raised the camera, but as I looked through the viewfinder, I saw something that made my blood freeze. In the reflection behind Jamie, a figure stood, tall, thin, its face hidden in shadow. Its hands rested on Jamie's shoulders, long fingers digging into his skin. I dropped the camera, the sound echoing in the silence. Jamie looked up at me, confusion in his eyes. "What's wrong?" he asked. Before I could answer, the lights flickered and went out, plunging us into darkness. The darkness was absolute. I couldn't see my own hand in front of my face, couldn't hear anything but the pounding of my heart and the low, relentless hum that seemed to vibrate through the walls. I called out for Jamie, my voice cracking in the thick silence. No answer. I fumbled for my flashlight, hands shaking, and when I finally managed to switch it on, the beam was weak, barely cutting through the gloom. The chair was empty. Panic surged through me. I swept the light around the room, searching for any sign of Jamie, but all I saw were the mirrors, dozens of them, each one reflecting my own terrified face, each one warped and twisted at the edges. In some, I looked older, in others younger, but in every single one, I was alone. I stumbled toward the door, desperate to get out, but the hallway was gone. Where the door had been was now just another mirror, cold and unyielding. I pressed my hands against the glass, feeling the chill seep into my skin. My reflection stared back at me, eyes wide with fear, lips moving in silent terror. Behind me, in the glass, I saw movement, a shadow flickering at the edge of the light. I spun around, but the room was empty. The hum grew louder, rising to a fever pitch, and the mirrors began to tremble, their surfaces rippling like water. I backed away, pressing myself against the wall, trying to make myself as small as possible. The shadows in the mirrors grew bolder, pressing against the glass, their forms shifting and writhing. Then, one by one, the mirrors began to crack. Hairline fractures snaked across the surfaces, spiderwebbing out from the center. The hum became a roar, and I clapped my hands over my ears, sinking to my knees. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and something else, something metallic and sharp. A voice whispered in my ear, so close I could feel the breath on my skin. "You shouldn't have come here." I squeezed my eyes shut, willing it all to be a nightmare, but when I opened them, the room had changed. The mirrors were gone, replaced by bare, concrete walls. The chair was overturned, its straps hanging loose. The only light came from a single, flickering bulb overhead. Jamie was gone. I forced myself to my feet, every muscle trembling. I called his name again, my voice echoing off the walls. No answer. I stumbled toward the door, this time, it was real, solid beneath my hand. I yanked it open and found myself back in the narrow hallway, the hum now a distant throb. I ran, not caring about the noise, not caring what might be waiting in the darkness. The hallway twisted and turned, the symbols on the walls seeming to pulse and writhe as I passed. I tripped over debris, scraped my hands on rough tile, but I didn't stop. I had to get out. I had to find Jamie. At last, I reached the stairs. I scrambled up them, two at a time, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The air grew warmer, the darkness less oppressive. I burst onto the first floor, my flashlight beam dancing wildly across the ruined walls. The hospital was silent. Too silent. I searched every room, every corridor, calling Jamie's name until my voice was raw. There was no sign of him, no footprints, no dropped camera, nothing. It was as if he'd never been there at all. I stumbled back to the window we'd climbed through, my hands numb, my mind reeling. I crawled out into the night, collapsing on the cold pavement, the fog swirling around me. I looked back at the hospital, its windows dark and empty, and for a moment, I thought I saw a figure standing in the doorway, a tall, thin shadow, watching me with eyes that glowed in the darkness. I ran to my car, fumbling with the keys, and didn't stop until I was miles away. I didn't sleep that night. I barely made it home, hands shaking so badly I could hardly keep the car on the road. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that room, the mirrors, the chair, the shadow behind Jamie. I kept telling myself it wasn't real, that I'd imagined it, that Jamie would call any minute, laughing about how he'd scared me. But the phone never rang. The next morning, I called his phone. It went straight to voicemail. I tried again and again, leaving messages that grew more desperate each time. I texted, I messaged him on every app we used, but there was nothing. No reply. I drove back to the hospital, parking in the same spot as before, the fog still clinging to the ground like a warning. The building looked different in the daylight, less menacing, more sad, like a wounded animal left to rot. But the fear was still there, coiled in my gut. I forced myself to go back inside. The window was still broken, the glass crunching under my boots. The air was stale, heavy with dust and the faint, lingering scent of decay. I retraced our steps, flashlight in hand, heart pounding in my chest. The first floor was just as we'd left it, empty exam rooms, collapsed ceilings, graffiti scrawled across the walls. I found the staircase to the basement, the door still hanging open. I hesitated at the top of the stairs, every instinct screaming at me to turn back. But I couldn't leave Jamie. Not without knowing. I descended, each step creaking under my weight, the darkness pressing in around me. The basement was colder than before, the air thick and damp. My flashlight flickered, the beam weak and uncertain. I found the room with the operating table, but it was empty now. The table was gone, the floor swept clean. The walls were bare, the symbols scrubbed away. It was as if the room had never existed. I searched every inch, running my hands over the walls, looking for any sign that we'd been there. Nothing. No scratches, no blood, no sign of Jamie. I tried to find the hallway with the mirrors, but it was gone. In its place was a solid wall, the tiles cracked and stained. I pounded on it, shouting Jamie's name, but the only answer was the echo of my own voice. I felt a wave of hopelessness crash over me, so strong I nearly collapsed. I searched the rest of the basement, but it was all the same, empty rooms, broken furniture, nothing out of the ordinary. I climbed back to the first floor, my mind racing, trying to make sense of what had happened. Had I imagined it all? Had Jamie ever really been there with me? The thought made me dizzy. I went to the police. I told them everything, how we'd gone into the hospital, how Jamie had disappeared, how I'd searched and found nothing. They listened, but I could see the doubt in their eyes. They searched the hospital, brought in dogs, combed every inch of the building. They found nothing. No sign of Jamie, no sign that anyone had been there at all. Days passed. Then weeks. Jamie's family put up flyers, organized search parties, pleaded for information on the news. But there were no leads, no witnesses, nothing. It was as if he'd vanished into thin air. I stopped sleeping. I stopped eating. I replayed that night over and over in my mind, searching for something I'd missed, some clue that would explain what had happened. But all I found were more questions. Sometimes, late at night, I'd drive back to the hospital, parking in the same spot, staring at the dark windows. I'd sit there for hours, hoping to see Jamie, hoping for any sign that he was still out there. But the only thing I ever saw was the shadow in the doorway, watching, waiting. I started to wonder if I was losing my mind. I tried to move on. I really did. I went back to work, forced myself to see friends, pretended to laugh at their jokes. But nothing felt real anymore. Every conversation was hollow, every day blurred into the next. People stopped asking about Jamie after a while. They stopped looking at me with pity and started looking at me with suspicion, as if I knew more than I was saying. As if I was hiding something. I started having nightmares. In them, I was back in the hospital, wandering endless hallways that twisted and turned, always leading me back to that room with the mirrors. Sometimes I'd see Jamie in the reflections, his face pale and eyes wide with terror, reaching out to me, begging for help. Other times, it was the shadow, tall, thin, faceless, standing behind me, its hands on my shoulders, whispering things I couldn't understand. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, heart racing, the taste of fear thick in my mouth. I tried to talk to someone about it, a therapist, someone who might help me make sense of what I'd seen. But every time I tried to explain, the words sounded crazy, even to me. How do you tell someone that your friend disappeared into thin air? That you saw things that couldn't possibly exist? That you're haunted by shadows and whispers and the feeling that you're being watched, even in your own home? I started seeing things out of the corner of my eye. Flickers of movement in the mirrors, shadows that didn't belong. Sometimes, when I was alone, I'd hear footsteps behind me, soft and slow, just like in the hospital. I'd turn, but there was never anyone there. The feeling of being watched grew stronger, until it was a constant presence, pressing in on me from all sides. One night, I woke to find my bedroom bathed in a strange, flickering light. I sat up, heart pounding, and saw that my closet door was open, the darkness inside deeper than it should have been. I got up, drawn by a force I couldn't explain, and stepped closer. The air grew colder, the light dimmer. I reached out, hand trembling, and touched the edge of the door. For a moment, I saw the hospital basement, the mirrors, the chair, the shadow. Jamie was there, sitting in the chair, his eyes locked on mine. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. The shadow loomed behind him, its hands reaching for his shoulders. I tried to scream, but my voice was gone. I woke up on the floor, the closet door closed, the room silent. My heart was racing, my skin clammy with sweat. I told myself it was just a dream, just my mind playing tricks on me. But when I looked in the mirror, I saw a handprint on my shoulder, long, thin fingers pressed into my skin, fading as I watched. After that, I couldn't stay in my apartment. I packed a bag and left, crashing on friends' couches, moving from place to place. But the feeling followed me, the sense that I was being watched, that the shadow was never far behind. I stopped looking in mirrors, stopped turning on the lights at night. I did everything I could to avoid seeing my own reflection. But it didn't matter. The nightmares kept coming, and every time I closed my eyes, I saw Jamie, trapped in that room, begging for help. And I saw the shadow, always watching, always waiting. I started to wonder if I'd ever be free. I became obsessed with finding answers. I spent hours online, searching for anything about St. Augustine Hospital, old news articles, urban legends, police reports. Most of what I found was the same recycled stories, rumors of malpractice, whispers of experiments gone wrong, tales of patients who vanished without a trace. But every so often, I'd stumble across something that felt too close to my own experience, a missing person, a strange sighting, a story about shadows in the basement. I started reaching out to people who claimed to have been inside. Most ignored me, but a few responded. Their stories were eerily similar, the feeling of being watched, the sense of time slipping away, the presence of something in the mirrors. One woman told me she'd gone in with her brother when they were teenagers. He'd dared her to sit in the chair in the basement room. She refused, but he did it, laughing the whole time. She said the lights flickered, and when they came back on, he was gone. She never saw him again. Another man described seeing his own reflection move independently, smiling when he wasn't, mouthing words he couldn't hear. He said he left the hospital and never looked in a mirror again. He warned me to stop searching, to let it go before it was too late. But I couldn't let it go. Not when Jamie was still missing. Not when I felt him calling to me in my dreams. I started visiting the hospital at night, parking across the street and watching the windows. Sometimes, I thought I saw movement, shadows flickering behind the glass, lights flickering on and off. Once, I saw a figure standing in the doorway, tall and thin, its face hidden in shadow. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, but the fear was real. One night, I decided to go back inside. I told myself it was the only way to find answers, the only way to bring Jamie home. I waited until midnight, when the streets were empty and the world felt suspended. I climbed through the broken window, flashlight in hand, and made my way to the basement. The air was colder than ever, thick with the scent of rot and something metallic. My footsteps echoed in the silence, each one a reminder that I was alone. I found the room where it had all happened, but it was empty, no chair, no mirrors, just bare concrete walls and a single, flickering bulb. I stood in the center of the room, heart pounding, and called Jamie's name. The silence pressed in around me, heavy and absolute. Then, slowly, the temperature dropped, and I saw my breath hanging in the air. The bulb flickered, then went out, plunging me into darkness. I heard footsteps behind me, soft, slow, deliberate. I turned, shining my flashlight, but the beam was swallowed by the darkness. I felt a hand on my shoulder, cold and heavy, and I froze. A voice whispered in my ear, so close I could feel the breath on my skin. "You shouldn't have come back." I spun around, but there was no one there. The darkness pressed in, thicker than before. I stumbled toward the door, but it was gone, just a blank wall where it had been. Panic surged through me, and I pounded on the concrete, screaming for help. The shadows shifted, coalescing into a shape, tall, thin, faceless. It reached for me, its fingers impossibly long, and I felt a wave of cold wash over me. I closed my eyes, bracing for the worst. When I opened them, I was outside, lying on the pavement, the hospital looming above me. My flashlight was gone, my hands numb with cold. I staggered to my feet, heart racing, and ran to my car. I didn't look back. After that night, I stopped trying to find Jamie. It wasn't a decision I made all at once, it was more like a slow surrender, a realization that whatever had taken him was beyond my reach. I still dreamed about him, still saw his face in crowds, still heard his voice in the quiet moments before sleep. But I stopped going to the hospital, stopped searching for answers that only led to more questions. I tried to rebuild my life, to find some sense of normalcy in a world that no longer felt safe. But the hospital never really let me go. Sometimes, I'd catch a glimpse of it out of the corner of my eye, a flash of broken windows, a flicker of movement in the shadows. Other times, I'd wake in the middle of the night, heart pounding, certain that someone was standing at the foot of my bed. I'd turn on the light, but the room would be empty, the only sound my own ragged breathing. I started seeing a therapist again, hoping that talking about it would help. I told her everything, about Jamie, about the hospital, about the shadows and the mirrors and the feeling of being watched. She listened patiently, never interrupting, never judging. She told me that trauma can do strange things to the mind, that it can make us see things that aren't there, remember things that never happened. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that it was all in my head. But deep down, I knew the truth. I knew what I'd seen, what I'd felt. I knew that Jamie was still out there, somewhere, trapped in a place I couldn't reach. One evening, months after Jamie disappeared, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something compelled me to pick up. For a moment, there was only static on the line. Then, a voice, faint, distorted, barely more than a whisper. "Help me." My blood ran cold. It was Jamie's voice. I tried to speak, but my throat was tight, my words caught in my chest. The line went dead, leaving me alone with the echo of his plea. I called the number back, but it was disconnected. I checked my call log, but there was no record of the call. I tried to convince myself it was a dream, a trick of my mind, but the fear was real, sharp and immediate. That night, I dreamed of the hospital again. I was back in the basement, standing in front of the mirrors. Jamie was there, his face pale and eyes hollow, reaching out to me. The shadow stood behind him, its hands on his shoulders, its face a void. I tried to run, but my feet were rooted to the floor. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. When I woke, my phone was on the floor, the screen cracked, the battery dead. I plugged it in, hands shaking, and waited for it to power up. When it finally did, I found a single new photo in my gallery, a picture of the hospital basement, the mirrors intact, the chair in the center of the room. In the reflection, I saw myself, standing behind Jamie, my face twisted in fear. I deleted the photo, but it reappeared the next day. And the day after that. No matter how many times I erased it, it always came back. I stopped using my phone. I stopped looking in mirrors. I stopped trusting my own reflection. But the feeling never left me, the sense that Jamie was still out there, still calling for help, still waiting for me to find him. I tried to fill my days with anything that would keep my mind busy, work, errands, endless hours at the gym, even volunteering at the local animal shelter. But no matter how much I tried to distract myself, the memories always found a way back in. Sometimes it was a smell, like the sharp tang of disinfectant, or the echo of footsteps in an empty hallway. Other times it was a flash of movement in a window, a shadow that seemed to linger just a little too long. I started to wonder if I was losing my grip on reality. My friends noticed the change. They tried to help, inviting me out, checking in with texts and calls, but I could see the worry in their eyes. I could hear it in their voices when they thought I wasn't listening. I wanted to tell them everything, to unburden myself, but every time I tried, the words caught in my throat. How do you explain that you're haunted by a place, by a memory, by the absence of someone you loved? One night, I was walking home from work when I felt it again, that prickling sensation at the back of my neck, the certainty that I was being watched. I turned, scanning the empty street, but there was no one there. The feeling didn't fade. If anything, it grew stronger, pressing in on me from all sides. I quickened my pace, heart pounding, eyes darting from shadow to shadow. When I reached my apartment, I locked the door behind me and leaned against it, trying to catch my breath. The room was silent, the only sound the hum of the refrigerator and the distant traffic outside. I went to the bathroom to splash water on my face, but when I looked in the mirror, I saw something that made my blood run cold. For a split second, I saw Jamie standing behind me, his eyes wide with fear, his mouth open in a silent scream. The shadow loomed over him, its hands wrapped around his shoulders, its face a swirling void. I spun around, but the room was empty. When I looked back at the mirror, it was just my own reflection, pale and shaken. I smashed the mirror with my fist, the glass shattering into 1,000 pieces. Blood dripped from my knuckles, but I barely felt the pain. I swept the shards into a bag and threw them away, but the image lingered in my mind, sharp and vivid. That night, I dreamed of the hospital again. This time, I was the one in the chair, the straps tight around my wrists and ankles. Jamie stood in front of me, his face twisted with guilt and sorrow. The shadow circled us, whispering in a language I couldn't understand. I tried to scream, to beg for forgiveness, but my mouth wouldn't open. The room spun, the mirrors warping and twisting, reflecting endless versions of myself, each one more terrified than the last. I woke up gasping, drenched in sweat, my heart racing. The room was dark, the air thick with the scent of fear. I lay there for hours, staring at the ceiling, afraid to close my eyes. The days blurred together after that. I stopped going to work, stopped answering calls, stopped leaving the apartment. I lived in a haze of exhaustion and dread, haunted by dreams and memories and the unshakable feeling that I was being watched. Sometimes, I'd catch a glimpse of Jamie in the corner of my eye, or hear his voice calling my name from another room. I knew it wasn't real, but it felt real. It felt more real than anything else. I started writing everything down, every dream, every memory, every detail I could remember about that night in the hospital. I filled notebook after notebook, trying to make sense of it all, trying to find some pattern, some clue that would explain what had happened. But the more I wrote, the less sense it made. The story twisted and turned, looping back on itself, always ending in the same place: the basement, the mirrors, the chair, the shadow. I realized then that some stories don't have endings. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. Some people are just gone, leaving only questions behind. I started to accept that Jamie was never coming back. It wasn't a sudden realization, but a slow, painful process, a kind of grief that never really ended, just changed shape. I tried to remember the good times, the way Jamie used to laugh so hard he'd cry, the late-night drives with the windows down and the music up, the secrets we shared under the stars. But even those memories felt tainted now, shadowed by what had happened. Every happy moment was followed by a pang of guilt, a whisper of what if. I tried to rebuild my life, piece by piece. I got a new job, moved to a different part of town, made new friends who didn't know about the hospital or the missing posters or the sleepless nights. For a while, it almost worked. I went weeks without thinking about Jamie, without dreaming of the basement or the mirrors or the shadow. I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, I could move on. But the past has a way of catching up with you. One evening, as I was leaving work, I found a note tucked under my windshield wiper. It was a single sheet of paper, folded in half, with my name written on the front in Jamie's handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside, there were only 3 words: "Help me. Please." I looked around, heart pounding, but the parking lot was empty. I tried to convince myself it was a cruel prank, that someone was messing with me, but deep down, I knew the truth. I knew Jamie was still out there, somewhere, trapped in that place between worlds, calling out for help. That night, I dreamed of the hospital again. This time, I was standing outside, looking up at the broken windows. Jamie was inside, pounding on the glass, his face twisted with fear and desperation. The shadow stood behind him, its hands on his shoulders, its face a swirling void. I tried to run to him, but my feet wouldn't move. I screamed his name, but no sound came out. The hospital loomed above me, silent and unyielding. When I woke, I found another note on my nightstand. Same handwriting, same message: "Help me. Please." My heart raced as I searched the apartment, but the doors were locked, the windows closed. No one could have gotten in. I tried to tell myself it was just a dream, that I'd written the note myself in my sleep, but the fear was real, sharp and immediate. I started seeing the shadow everywhere, in reflections, in the corners of rooms, in the spaces between streetlights at night. It was always watching, always waiting, always just out of reach. I stopped sleeping, stopped eating, stopped living. I was a ghost in my own life, haunted by memories and guilt and the unshakable feeling that I'd failed my friend. One night, I sat down at my desk and wrote a letter to Jamie. I told him I was sorry, that I'd tried everything I could to find him, that I missed him every day. I told him about the dreams, the notes, the shadow. I told him I hoped he'd found peace, wherever he was. I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer with the others, a small, growing pile of apologies and confessions I'd never send. After that, the dreams started to fade. The shadow grew less distinct, more like a memory than a presence. The notes stopped appearing. I started to sleep again, to eat, to live. The pain never went away, but it became bearable, a dull ache instead of a sharp stab. I still think about Jamie every day. I still wonder what happened to him, if he's still out there, if he ever found the peace he was looking for. I don't know if I'll ever have answers. But I do know this: some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. Some stories don't have happy endings. And some shadows never really leave us, they just become a part of who we are. Sometimes, on quiet nights, I find myself driving past the old hospital again. I don't stop, not anymore. I just slow down, watching the building loom out of the darkness, its windows empty and black, its walls crumbling under the weight of years and secrets. The place looks smaller now, less like a monster and more like a wound that never healed. But even from the safety of my car, I can feel its pull, a gravity that tugs at something deep inside me, a whisper that says, "Come back. Just one more time." I wonder if Jamie is still there, somewhere in the maze of hallways and locked rooms, waiting for someone to find him. I wonder if the shadow is real, or just a manifestation of guilt and grief and all the things I can't let go. I wonder if I'll ever be able to forgive myself for leaving him behind. I've tried to talk to people about what happened, but most don't want to hear it. They change the subject, offer empty reassurances, or look at me with that mix of pity and discomfort reserved for the truly broken. A few have listened, really listened, and for a moment, I feel lighter, as if sharing the story takes some of the weight off my shoulders. But the relief never lasts. The story always comes back, looping in my mind, demanding to be told again. I started writing everything down, not just for myself, but for Jamie. For anyone who might stumble across this story and recognize a piece of their own pain in it. Maybe that's why we tell stories in the first place, to make sense of the things that don't make sense, to give shape to the shadows that haunt us, to keep the memory of those we've lost alive. Sometimes, I dream of a different ending. In these dreams, I go back to the hospital and find Jamie waiting for me, alive and whole, his smile as bright as ever. We walk out together, leaving the darkness behind, the sun rising over the horizon. I wake up with tears on my face, the ache of hope and loss mingling in my chest. But most nights, the dreams are darker. I'm back in the basement, the mirrors all around me, the chair empty. I see my own reflection, older and more tired, the shadow standing just behind me. I try to run, but the room stretches on forever, the walls closing in, the hum of the hospital growing louder and louder until it drowns out everything else. I don't know if I'll ever be free of that place. Maybe none of us ever really escape the things that haunt us. Maybe we just learn to live with them, to carry them with us like scars. I've come to accept that some questions will never have answers, that some stories will never have closure. But I keep telling them anyway, because it's all I have left. If you're reading this, if you've ever lost someone or been haunted by a place or a memory you can't shake, know that you're not alone. We all have our own abandoned hospitals, our own shadows, our own stories that refuse to let us go. Maybe the best we can do is keep moving forward, one day at a time, and hope that someday, the light will find us again. I still keep a light on at night, just in case. Not because I'm afraid of the dark, but because I want Jamie to find his way home, if he ever can. And maybe, just maybe, I'll find my way out of the shadows too. There are nights when I lie awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the city outside my window. The world feels so normal, so safe, but I know better now. I know how thin the line is between the ordinary and the unexplainable, how quickly everything you trust can unravel. Sometimes I wonder if Jamie is lying awake somewhere too, trapped in a place where time doesn't move, where the only company is his own reflection and the shadow that never leaves. I wonder if he blames me for leaving, for not saving him, for surviving when he didn't. I've tried to make peace with what happened, to forgive myself for the choices I made. Some days, I almost succeed. I go to work, I laugh at jokes, I make plans for the future. But the past is always there, just beneath the surface, waiting for a quiet moment to remind me of everything I lost. I see Jamie's face in strangers, hear his voice in the static between radio stations, feel his presence in the hush before dawn. Grief is a strange thing, it doesn't fade, it just changes shape, becoming part of who you are. I've learned to live with the uncertainty, to accept that some mysteries will never be solved. The world is full of places like St. Augustine Hospital, places where the rules don't apply, where the past lingers and the shadows are deeper than they should be. Most people never see them, never feel their pull. But for those of us who do, the experience leaves a mark. It changes the way you see everything, makes you question what's real and what's just a trick of the light. Sometimes, I get messages from people who've heard my story. They tell me about their own losses, their own brushes with the unknown. Some have lost friends or family to places that don't exist on any map, to doors that appear and disappear, to voices that call from the darkness. Others have seen things in mirrors that shouldn't be there, felt hands on their shoulders when they were alone. We share our stories, not because it makes the pain go away, but because it reminds us that we're not alone. There's comfort in knowing that someone else understands, that someone else has stood at the edge of the same abyss. I still dream about the hospital. In my dreams, I walk the empty halls, searching for Jamie. Sometimes I find him, sitting in the chair in the basement, his eyes hollow, his voice barely more than a whisper. Other times, I find only the shadow, waiting for me, its arms open wide. I wake up with my heart racing, the taste of fear sharp on my tongue. But I keep dreaming, keep searching, because I can't let go, not yet. I've thought about going back, about facing the hospital one last time. Maybe if I did, I'd find the answers I've been searching for. Maybe I'd find Jamie, or at least some sign of what happened to him. But every time I get close, something holds me back, a memory, a warning, a voice in the back of my mind that says, some doors should stay closed. I don't know if I'll ever have the courage to open that door again. For now, I try to live. I try to honor Jamie's memory by moving forward, by finding meaning in the small moments of everyday life. I try to be kind to myself, to forgive the mistakes I made, to believe that I did the best I could. I keep the light on at night, not out of fear, but as a beacon, for Jamie, for myself, for anyone who's ever been lost in the dark. If you're reading this, if you've ever lost someone or been haunted by a place you can't explain, know that you're not alone. We all carry our own shadows, our own stories, our own unanswered questions. Maybe we'll never find all the answers. Maybe some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved. But as long as we keep searching, as long as we keep telling our stories, there's hope. Hope that one day, the lost will be found. That the shadows will lift. That the light will return. And if you ever find yourself standing at the edge of a place like St. Augustine Hospital, remember my story. Remember Jamie. Remember that some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. But also remember that you're not alone. There are others out there, keeping the light on, waiting for you to come home.